When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Stephen Show. User: Uneasy Neighbor. Posted July 22nd, 1999.
This is the kind of neighborhood where people get to know each other. It's not like the city where you avoid the eyes of everyone in your building, or the suburbs where you live so far apart you might never see one another. This is a small town, and here we take care of our own. That's why it was such a tragedy when Eleanor West passed last winter. Ellie was a kind soul who never had a bad word to say about anyone, nor anyone about her. Her son Stephen was another matter. The Wests have lived on our street for longer than we've been here, and we've all watched Stephen grow up, or at least get bigger. The TV news reporter said he was 42, a bull of a man in body, but childlike in mind. My husband, Norm, thinks he was just lazy, an attitude his mother could have fixed with a couple swift kicks up the backside. Norm's words, not mine. Stephen was never rude or aggressive. It was more that he always seemed to be lost in thought, half present and half lost in some fantasy known only to him. Ellie did everything for him, cooked, kept house, looked after the yard, and you could see it took a toll. She was never a large woman, and toward the end, she was practically skeletal. Watching her shovel their long, winding sidewalk that unusually cold November was heartbreaking. If not for my arthritis, I'd have gone out and done it myself. Despite my asking many times, Norm would give her a hand himself, even though we have a snowblower. Why should I put wear and tear on my snowblower, he'd always say, when she could get that damned house ox of hers out of there? As I watched paramedics roll Ellie down that sidewalk, her tiny body barely making a dent in the white sheet covering it, I couldn't help thinking there was more I could have done. My second thought was, what will become of Stephen now? What happened was the house fell into ruin. Me and some of the other neighbors brought him food for the first few weeks, leaving it at the front door when he wouldn't answer our knocks. It eventually disappeared from the stoop, so he must have been eating it. He never thanked us, never returned any of our cookware, but we kept it up until it became too much of a bother to keep replacing our casserole dishes. When the New Year's windstorm blew one of the maples down onto the west garage, not a thing was done. It stayed there, letting in snow and ice until the interior must have been a frozen wreck. Stephen didn't emerge from the house until an early thaw had progressed enough to make his front walkway passable again. He looked terrible, skinnier than he had been, his unshaven face drawn. I went out to speak with him, getting the same half greeting I always had. I told him I was sorry about what had happened to Ellie, and he said the strangest thing. I think they're going to recast. He was nodding breezily the whole time as if this made all the sense in the world. For a moment, I was flummoxed, then I had to ask, recast? What do you mean, Stephen? For the first time ever, he focused his full attention on me, his gray eyes bright. He winked knowingly, and I felt a full body chill as he leaned in to whisper, "You're very good. I've been a fan for a long time." His breath was horrendous, a rank, meaty smell mixing with the unwashed funk of his body odor, hitting me hard enough I almost threw up. I choked it back down, clapping a hand over my mouth and stepping away from him before hastily excusing myself. I could feel Stephen's eyes on me the whole way back home. Norm waved off the whole experience, never once turning his face away from the television. "I told you that kid was a fruitcake, Betty. Just don't talk to him anymore. You'll be fine." The girls at my coffee circle were much more understanding because they had Stephen's stories of their own. Jeanette Poitras had seen him downtown, staring hungrily at a group of schoolgirls on their lunch break. Mel Waters, who lived across the street from us, had seen Stephen outside the bank, staring at passing women. The intensity of his gaze made Mel uncomfortable, and she tried to distract him by striking up a conversation. "Stephen, hi," she said, stepping between him and the passing rush of people. "It's Mel Waters. I'm your neighbor. How are you doing?" He regarded her, sweeping his eyes and down her body. "No, thank you." Mel was nonplussed. "Excuse me? No, thank you what?" "If they're going to give me a love interest this season, they can do better than you. No offense, but you're not my type." She was at a loss for words. No easy feat if you know Mel. "I don't... what?" Stephen looked at her patiently. "Hey, maybe on the previous seasons we could have made it work, but look at all this." He gestured at the people going by. "This season, the show has a way bigger budget. We can do better." "What show? What are you talking about?" Now it was Stephen's turn to look confused, as if she'd asked the world's most obvious question. The Stephen Show. With that, he shook his head and walked away. None of us knew what to make of the story, but it left us all deeply concerned. Allie, one of the younger women in the group, suggested we go to the police. "It sounds like he's delusional, right? He's creeping on kids and talking about love interests. I don't have to tell you what that sounds like." There was an uncomfortable silence at the table. Allie had only lived in town for a year, with no occasion to ever engage with our local sheriff's department. Sheriff Childers had his own history of keeping company with the young women of our town. Stephen's behavior wasn't likely to move the needle. There was no good way to tell Allie this, so we agreed that would be the best course of action, knowing full well none of us were going to do any such thing. Norm has always been a heavy sleeper, so the sirens which woke me up that night didn't even get a twitch out of him. They were distant, but drawing closer. I left the bed and slipped on my dressing gown, then crept to the window to see if they were coming up our street. Instead of police cars, I saw Stephen limping from lamppost to lamppost, leaving behind a heavy red trail that shone under the halos of light. The sirens got louder until first one police cruiser appeared, then another. Stephen looked behind him, then limped faster until he slipped while turning onto his own sidewalk. He tumbled to the ground, the police car screeching to a halt, feet from him, 2 officers getting out of each. One of them shouted at Stephen, who was trying to get back to his feet while nursing his wounded leg. "Stay where you are. You are under arrest." Stephen's face was warped in indignant rage. He finally managed to push himself back up, rising to his full height. He screamed back at the officers, "She broke character on my show. Do you know how embarrassing that was for me?" In the flashing red and blue light of the police cars, I saw Stephen reach into his pocket and pull out what looked like a hunting knife. The officers drew their pistols, moving forward. "Drop the knife, Stephen. You've already been shot once tonight." Stephen braced himself like a decision had been made. The officers saw it too and raised their pistols. The one who had been speaking made a final attempt to rein him in. "Don't!" but Stephen cut him off. "This is the Stephen Show. You do what I say, and I say cut." He rushed the officers, the knife held high. For a single frozen moment, the police hesitated. Were they actually going to listen? The answer came almost instantly, a volley of pistol shots that caused Stephen to jerk and twist. He collapsed backward, his head cracking heavily against concrete. Whatever the Stephen Show had been was now over.
Subject: playing chicken. User: R8der. Posted January 22nd, 1997.
The house we live in was built by my great-great-grandfather, Brady Elias. It's a turn-of-the-century Queen Anne with gabled roof and gingerbread trim, passed down through our family for generations. It's beautiful, stately, and very much haunted. Before she passed, my grandmother Jackie, who had lived there for almost 80 years, swore up and down that not only was there a ghost, it was a malicious spirit who wished to hurt her. "It keeps moving furniture," is what she would always say. I should mention that Grandma Jackie had started to go blind in her early 50s. By her 70s, she could only see in shades, navigating her home by touching walls, furniture, and counting her steps. If someone were to be moving her furniture, it would have made getting around a serious challenge. Mom and Dad seemed to think she was just doing this for attention, completely ignoring the fact Grandma did start having more falls in her last few months of living there. Sometimes, I think they just wanted her out of here so we could move in, letting Dad off the hook for having to pay a mortgage. Now, they're experiencing weird shit in the house too, and having lots of whisper fights that aren't all that quiet. The harmless stuff happens outside. Because the house is on a sloping piece of property, we have two pretty big staircases leading to the front and side door. Both sets of stairs were carpeted around 15 years ago in an effort to make them safer for Grandma, particularly in winter when the ice sets in. The side stairs lead to a door in the kitchen, and one night we were sitting around the table eating dinner when we heard someone running up the steps. None of us were expecting company, so we sat waiting for a knock on the door that never came. Eventually, Mom got up and opened the door to the small stoop. It was empty. We never heard departing footsteps, and there were no boot impressions in the snow whatsoever, all of which added up to the kind of mystery my parents don't like dealing with. They quickly declared we'd all been imagining it and went back to eating, ignoring my quizzical stare. I knew damn well it hadn't been my imagination. Not only hadn't it been my imagination, I had heard footsteps on concrete, not padded carpet. Pointing this out to them would have been an exercise in futility, so I didn't bother. The steps refused to be ignored, however, returning many, many times, always in the same way. Running steps on a hard surface, followed by nothing at all. I can't tell you how many times I watched Mom or Dad rip open that side door, trying to catch whoever they thought might have been pranking them. The serious stuff, the stuff that makes me want to move out of here the second I turn 18, seems to happen in the living room. This is also where my grandmother had the most accidents, including the final fall, which put her in the hospital. I made this observation once to my parents and was sent to my room without dinner, which I consider to be a victory. Pillows get torn, which my parents claim is the stitching bursting under pressure. I'm not a furniture expert, but I've never heard of such a thing, and neither had any of my teachers. Then, The intercom started talking. Grandma had had it installed when Dad was talking about getting her a home care nurse, something I don't have to tell you never happened. The circuit ran from her bedroom to a speaker microphone on the far wall of the living room, next to the hallway entrance. Dad would use it to call Mom when she was upstairs taking naps or try to summon me for whatever dumbass reason happened to be on his mind. I didn't like him using it, so most of the time when I heard his voice coming through the tinny speaker down the hall from my room, I'd ignore it. It never occurred to me to prank him, and I wish it had. At least then I wouldn't be so pissed about him accusing me of responding to him with the sound of children's laughter. One time I was out shoveling the walk when I heard him somewhere on the second floor shouting my name. He must have walked right into my bedroom looking for me because I watched through the window as he realized I was outside. The raging red color in his cheeks drained to white. He would never tell me what he had been so mad about except to say that the intercom must be picking up stray radio signals. It was removed after that. The worst incident so far has been Mom's accident. Instead of moving Grandma's stuff to storage when we moved in, we ditched most of our furniture and used hers. One of the few items we brought was a glass-topped coffee table, a holdover from when Dad actually made decent cash working for a web startup. He was convinced the whole internet thing was a fad and ditched out before the company went public. By now, he'll know how that went for us. Mom and I were going to watch 90210 together, so she'd gone to make herself a Sanka before it started. On the way back from the kitchen, a piping hot drink in hand, something pushed her hard from the back, sending her face first into that coffee table. The top sheet practically exploded, cutting up her face and arms. She spent a week in the hospital, the whole time claiming she'd tripped. It was such a bad cover story that if Dad hadn't been on camera working at the gas station when it happened, he'd have been locked up. So now we all know what the house is capable of, and we're still living here. Like idiots, we're playing chicken with the devil and hoping he blinks first.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.